G'day guys, and welcome to another episode of Covid Convos. This is episode 4, and we are absolutely thrilled to have with us today Dr. Louise Lambert, and she is coming to us from the UAE. Now, a little bit of a bio about Louise. She is a professor at the United Arab Emirates University, a professor of positive psychology, and also is a editor, I believe, on the journal, or the Middle East Journal of Positive Psychology. Did I get that correct,
Yeah.
Louise?
Yeah, close enough.
Fantastic. So thanks so much for joining us. And if you don't mind, would you just give us a little bit of I guess, your perspective on how, what's the lived experience in the UAE at the moment, given the circumstances with the coronavirus?
Well, we were pretty fortunate that we didn't get the head start China did, but we did get on top of it early enough. So schools were canceled 3 weeks ago. We've been on holidays for 2 weeks. Next week, we'll start with online teaching here at the university. So the authorities acted on it pretty quickly in terms of shutting things down. Every day, I think, like most countries now, something new closes. So yesterday, the malls have now closed. The day before, it was bars, nightclubs, restaurants for the moment are still open. Beaches in Abu Dhabi are closed. Parks were closed as well. I think those are slated to reopen. So I think it's just kind of hour to hour. But in terms of how people are dealing with it, people have been pretty calm, actually. But for the most part, people are just kind of getting on with it. I mean, there's really nothing else to do, really, but to just move on.
So you're obviously working within a university setting. How's that work sort of changed then in the last couple of weeks, with everything being sort of going in that shutdown process you were talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to see how that's going to roll out next week. So immediately, I think they closed schools. I think it was a Wednesday or Thursday, and our weekend begins on Thursday, Friday. So it just kind of ended there, and then we have the 2-week spring break immediately. So I think next week, particularly in universities, most of us will be going, where's the record button? and there's the real test going to be for how the rest of the semester is going to roll out online. But most universities are already set up online, so we use Blackboard. Everything was already there, so nothing's really going to be different, except for I'll be talking to a screen now rather than students live.
So Louise, it sounds as though you're thinking this isn't going to be over within days or weeks. You sort of suggested it might be the whole semester that you'll be going into this sort of online teaching mode?
Yeah, I mean, they've said until the end of March, and then they would reassess. And I think that's kind of the estimate most governments are taking, is end of March, reassess by then. I don't know, but it would seem that the chances of this going on a little bit longer online would probably be higher rather than lower, I would estimate.
Yeah, okay.
I think in that is one of the real fundamental underlying themes of this period of time is I don't know. So I was like talking to my partner who's doing her honors year at La Trobe University at the moment. Microbiology, I think biochemistry, microbiology, that kind of thing. And she's struggling because her university can only tell her what's going to happen a week in advance. And so many different organizations are dealing with that. And, you know, when you have to do cell cultures, it takes like months. And if you have to stop them, they're all going to die and waste like thousands of dollars. It's a real bind because you have to do something, but what can you really do when you don't know? That uncertainty. How have you been dealing with that? How has the UAE been dealing with that?
Well, I think every institution and every organization has kind of been left to, you know, figure that out to an extent. And I think that's kind of the case worldwide. What will work in one institution or one department may not necessarily work in another. For myself, what I've tried to do, so immediately when we were told things were going to close and we were just going to move into holidays, I just immediately thought of my students and sent everybody an email and said, look, I have no idea what's going on. I don't know how we're going to do this. I need to find the record button. I need to figure stuff out. But I just wanted to reassure them that, look, we'll get through this together and it's all good. And don't worry. And I'm here and you can email me with whatever. And I've kept up with that, just reaching out and just letting them know. Because if you were writing back, we were supposed to have midterms the following week. And so a lot of them were like, what's going to happen with that? So, you know, I think for me, that's the important piece is in this time where we don't know, at least reaching out to people to say, look, I don't know either, but I got your back and we'll do what we can together. I think that goes a really long way. And I don't know how much organizations are using that, but that would be like my one little advice. Just reach out and just let people know that we'll get through together. That, you know, just feeling cared for and feeling like somebody is recognizing and acknowledging your anxiety and your fear.
Yeah, that human side of things is so important. And I don't think that's changed at all from normal times. It's probably become just even more important. Louise, you were saying some people have got a bit of angst maybe about being able to hit the record button on a screen and the technology or technological side of things. You've done pretty well to join us today, because we were actually quite worried that that Zoom wasn't going to work. A couple of articles online said Zoom and Skype and all these different types of technology don't work in the UAE. So it's, I guess my question is, what sort of software, or do you know what type of software you'll be using, or is any training that's taken place already?
Yeah, and to be honest, I haven't looked into that yet. That's been my little bit of denial. So because we've been on holidays for 2 weeks, our IT department has been emailing with video tutorials, how to use the system. So like I said, we were always on Blackboard anyway, and now it's really how do we conduct video lessons, but also what is a good lesson. So you talked about earlier that 40 minutes is too long for people to hold their attention, and that's true online. So in a really interesting class, you can hold people their attention for a while, but online 15, 20 minutes, you know, is kind of max. So it's even thinking about how do I restructure a lesson, and then also the technology piece. So that support has been there. I just haven't quite gotten there yet. I've been the tardy teacher.
I was also going to say, Louise, I'm picking up a bit of an accent, and we don't know a lot about each other, because we've managed to connect just through LinkedIn, which is fantastic. It's a great platform for that. So, you know, once again, really appreciate you taking a leap here with just a guy emailing you out of the blue, asking if you'd join us. But is that accent from America or Canada?
No, I'm Canadian. And being here, yeah. Woo, no. So, no, yes, I am Canadian, and I've been here in the UAE probably about 10 years now.
Okay, because I was just sort of angling at that idea that, you know, how do you feel being away from home? But I guess that UAE probably feels somewhat like home for you now.
It does, but I have to admit, last week, you know, you're listening to all the social media, and I started to panic as well, and just to kind of go, do I go home? You know, my mom and dad are there, and they're in really good shape, but they're in their 70s. My two sisters are there, and you know, their families also, and yeah, that is a concern when you're an expat. Is do you go home, and if you go home, you might get stuck there, and then you lose your job. But then do you stay, and then what if something happens to your family and you can't leave the country? So that's always a tough decision to make. So, but my mom and dad are troopers, and they're sanitizing their credit cards. I think they'll be fine.
That's the core tip for this episode. Sanitize your credit cards.
I assume I've never been to UAE myself, but I assume there's you're not the only sort of expat living over there. There'd be quite a number of people in your situation that are away from their families and
Yeah, 9 million of us.
Yeah. And so, yeah, is that normally using online tools like Zoom and those sort of things? And is that, do you see that, is that changing at the moment? Are more people coming and going? Are people deciding to leave and go home?
Well, I think at the moment, I think as you know, the hours go on, I think less and less people are leaving because, you know, if I were to leave to Canada, I have one more day to do it, and then I can't fly into Canada anyway. So I think people who are here have now made the decision to stay and just see it out until that, you know, until further notice. So I think that definitely adds an extra layer of insecurity and anxiety because we're not from here.
What does your day-to-day look like at the moment then, Louise? Do you still go to the office, or I guess I'm digging into what are you doing for yourself and to make sure that it's a sustainable lifestyle, that if this does continue, you can do it.
Yeah, and certainly. So I'm actually at the university today. Which is why I got here a little bit late because every single building is locked down. So I'm actually in the cleaners room, poked in, and I'm like, "Can I sit here?" Everything's closed down, so the university is in Al Ain. It's about an hour and a half outside of Dubai. So I've come here today to be able to make sure Zoom works, because it works, you know, some places. And I also have an apartment here. So I just work on papers, proposals, kind of whatever. And then I also have a place in Dubai. So I made the decision to stay away from Dubai for a few days, just in terms of social distancing. It's a bit harder in a bigger city. Also, I share a house with a few people, and you know, we're all kind of close. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to come out here and talk to myself, I guess, for a while. But classes start again on Sunday. So my task over the next little bit is going to be to figure out, how do I do this online stuff?
I think it's, so I was actually at the University of Melbourne this morning. And yeah, I entered into the Center of Poli Psych there, and it was empty. It was dead. I actually saw one of the PhD students and lecturers taking their plants with them because they were like, I'm going to work from home. I need to take my plants with me.
Right? Yeah.
Who's going to look after them?
Exactly.
Obviously, it was going to be a long-term thing. I just think it's weirdly ironic, right, that now one of the emptiest places, probably where you can have the most distance, is work. It's so strange.
Yeah, no, it's very bizarre. We'll see. Yes.
I was going to say, Louise, what's the current, moving away a little bit from the current situation to more general pos psych question, which is, I guess, what connects us all. What's the current status of positive psychology in the UAE, in your opinion?
Maybe I can talk about that more regionally. So I think there's more interest in positive psych than there was before. I think like most places, it just was not well known before. I think people have a greater understanding of it. And in terms of the research, though, I would say there's not much happening. It is growing, but I don't think that's a reflection of positive psychology so much. I think that's just a reflection of research in general, particularly with psychology in general as well. So it mirrors, the growth or lack thereof in psychology itself. Having said that, with the journal, I think people are now kind of going, oh, that's a thing, and asking more questions about it. We are getting more submissions for sure. Interest in Saudi Arabia has grown. So there's one university there that is very clearly teaching courses in positive psychology and doing research there as well. In Oman as well, in Bahrain. So there's a few, but they're not departments per se. It's interested researchers who are doing it, but they're definitely still in the minority. So I think there's a huge scope. There's lots of room to certainly accommodate more research and researchers, and that would be a really welcome development here, to have more research into the area take place, for sure.
I'm curious on that kind of topic of research. Is there any unique or interesting research that you think is happening in the UAE that might not be happening in the rest of the world that could be potentially helpful?
So one of the studies that I'm working on at the moment is looking at the fear of happiness. So there's a guy, actually he's just moved to University of Melbourne. It might have been the guy with the plant. Mohsen Jackson, and we publish a lot together, and he is the one who coined that construct, fear of happiness, and it tends to be a thing in Islamic cultures and in other parts of the world. But essentially, it's this idea that if you show happiness or express happiness, something bad is going to happen. So unlike American culture, for example, where everyone's like, yeah, you wear happiness almost as a sign of personal success. Here you don't show it off too much because it might invite jealousy, it might invite, just awkward relationships where now suddenly people are going, well, why are you so happy? Particularly in a collective culture. So that's my interest, is how do you be happy when you're in that climate or when that's the norm?
So interesting to hear that particular construct, because even though Australia is very close to America in a lot of ways, I feel like we have a bit of that. There is this thing in Australia where you don't want to show other people that you're happy. You don't talk about your own happiness that much. There's a kind of distance from it, or a minimizing. We have things like tall poppy syndrome, where you can't get too big for your boots. So it's really interesting to hear that. I think people in our general area probably have the same. And I'm thinking within the context of this crisis, like we were talking a little bit earlier, how it's hard to, we want to talk about well-being because we know that it's important, but how do you do that in a way that is respectful? Because there is real stuff going on. People's family are sick. People are dying. We don't want to just talk about happiness like nothing exists. But at the same time, it's really important to talk about well-being at this point in time because it's so necessary to move on and have resilience in the face of that. But what happens when you have this fear of expressing or talking about happiness? Yeah.
And I'm glad you brought up that point. So I'm also on a listserv around happiness at work. And so yesterday I made a comment and I said, I wonder if we need to lay off the happiness and move into more resilience. And crickets, like nobody responded. And I thought, oh, okay. And so I think it was just awkward. I thought, gosh, I think I've offended every happiness person. But yeah, I think, do we need to brand it differently? Well-being is not skipping around like you're on a magical unicorn, but it's about keeping your head, rolling with the punches, being resilient, being kind of tough about stuff. It's also about acknowledging that it's going to get bad. And I think there's room for that. So one of my sort of awkward moments on LinkedIn is everyone's like, be optimistic, be this, be that. And I'm thinking, that puts an awful lot of pressure on people to be happy in the face of really tough circumstances. And I wonder if the message needs to be more accommodating and accepting of anxiety and fear, because these are real things and we need to have that respect for reality. And also, how do we move on in spite of that as well? So maybe the messaging needs to change slightly so people don't, in addition to what's happening, also feel like they need to be happy about it in some weird way.
And, I really come back to how you're approaching your university class in this moment. It's something as simple as saying, we're in this together. Like, we know that there's crap and we also know that there's good. and we're going to get through this together, both sides of it. You know, and that kind of framing, I thought, was just so important and powerful, and it can apply in so many different cases. But I just wanted to acknowledge that's a little powerful. Would you call it a practice or method?
Yeah. And I like the word acknowledge. I mean, you're acknowledging what I did, but I think it's also about acknowledging that it's okay to be freaked out because these are pretty freaky times. And try and pretend otherwise. You know, I kind of question people who are overly optimistic. I'm like, do you recognize how bad this is? Like, are you not watching the news? So it's just, how do we balance the two?
Louise, this is a real interest area of mine as well. And it seems to be one, you know, a simplistic view is sort of a real difference between Eastern cultures and modern Western cultures. Is this ability or the construct of acceptance, I suppose, or acknowledging that there's ups and downs, and, you know, some in the West want to be, you know, strong and stoic and resilient all the time, and never sort of admit that anything might be going wrong. But from your experience, being a Canadian living in UAE and anywhere else you've been, what do you find between those cultures? Does that sort of marry up as well?
I would say yes. So, I mean, there's one thing I really like here. You know, it's this idea of inshallah, if God wills it. And while that can be frustrating at times, I think there's a lot of value in that, of just saying, look, it's going to be what it's going to be. And you can worry about it all you like. It's not going to change the outcome. You can be optimistic about it all you like. It's not going to change the outcome. So how do we just accept what is coming, control what we can, and move forward? So I've kind of grown to stop forcing myself to be optimistic and just like, look, it's just going to be what it's going to be, and how do I just accept? I like acceptance. This is where we're at.
So, Louise, my little 20-minute timer's gone off, and that tells me that people are going to start mentally switching off. So, final question is, is there anything that we haven't asked you about that you'd like to share, or anything you'd like to add on what you've already discussed?
You know, I think it's just kind of to reiterate that message that don't pressure yourself to be happy, because that will make you unhappy. And it's okay to feel freaked out and anxious, because these are scary times, but at the same time, you know, the regular daily life applies. Connect with your friends, you know, keep a little plant in your office and talk to it every day. And, you know, we just got to do what we can. I mean, like, this is it. And you can get freaked out. You can be optimistic. Really, at the end of the day, this coronavirus is going to do what it's going to do. And we just got to roll with it, because we can't control it.
That's a really good message to finish on, Louise. Thank you so much for joining us. And it blows my mind that we can have 4 people in 3 completely different parts of the world connecting. And like Kesh said yesterday, that's one of the amazing things about that. We're actually really lucky that this is occurring in 2020, because we can connect like this and get your perspective. So it's been an absolute pleasure to hear from you. And we wish you all the best and hope maybe that in the coming weeks, if things change, or if you'd like to touch back with us, that you can do so, and maybe we can you know, catch up in person in the future. That'd be fantastic.
Thank you so much, guys. Have a great day, and good luck to everybody. We're going to need it.